Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics webinar entitled Your PDP and Practice Competencies, What's in it for you and What's Next? This presentation is planned with the Commission on Dietetic Registration, and it is approved for 2 hours of continuing professional education. My name is Karen Lacey, and I am a CDR Commissioner as well as a member of the CDR Competency Assurance Panel. And I would like to reiterate and stress the importance of having everyone's microphone be on mute. Just so that you're aware, there are almost 1,100 participants on this webinar. So in order for everyone to have good audio and hear well, it's going to be really important. And as mentioned earlier, there will be an opportunity, probably 30 minutes at the end of this webinar, to provide questions and answers in which you can write your question in the chat box. And you can put that question at any time, and then we'll be able to have an opportunity to answer those questions, like I said, at the end of the presentation. Excuse me. So as I said, I'm Karen Lacey, and this webinar is being presented today to Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics members. And again, I want to welcome all of you, and I'm so pleased that so many of you found that this is an interesting and important topic. So with that, let's begin. This next slide is just a standard disclosure that is presented as part of information. And I will not read it, but it is there for your information in terms of some of the legality that the certification by CDR actually represents. We have a number of objectives that we wish to discuss today, and hopefully, like I said, they will bring resonance to your needs as both a practitioner and possibly an educator, as well as a leader. First of all, we want to describe the practice competencies as they are now going to be part of the revised PDP recertification process. There'll be a lot of opportunity in this presentation to talk about practice competencies, and they're also referred to as essential practice competencies. So you're going to hear me talk about that and use that term frequently throughout the presentation. I also am going to be talking about performance indicators. And these two pieces of the new PDP portfolio recertification process are going to be really important because they are going to replace what we currently have in our process of the goals and the learning need codes. Excuse me. We want to talk about some changes that are part of the process, but you'll also be able to recognize that a lot of it will remain very familiar and quite similar to what we currently have. Then, of course, it's always interesting in terms of what is it going to affect me and what's the timeline for this process. And last but not least, and this is one of the things I'm really excited about in this new process, is we're going to talk about the newly developed Gold Wizard tool and how that's actually going to enhance and improve the entire process. So with that in mind, let's begin, because as you can see, we have a lot of important aspects of this presentation this morning. As I mentioned, we're going to be shifting from goals and learning need codes to competencies and performance indicators. And there is a document, Essential Practice Competencies, that's actually indicators. The document lists all of the essential practice competencies. It is on the website. A little bit of background before I get into discussing the competencies and performance indicators. And I think the next few slides will help us understand the importance of this change and a little bit of the framework within which these new competencies and this revised process was developed. The transformation of the PDP process from goals and learning need codes to these competencies and performance indicators that I mentioned really helps address the regulatory changes and expectations of regulatory bodies in the United States and worldwide. And I might mention, just so that you know that as a profession, we're really ahead of the game. We will be the only accredited profession within the United States that is moving to competencies. So we're really setting the stage for other professions to follow in step. The regulatory compliance with HIPAA and the Joint Commission raises expectations for nutrition and dietetics practitioners to be able to demonstrate professional competence in their practice. So our shift to these essential competencies acknowledges and assists our credentialed practitioners in being able to demonstrate to both regulatory agents and employers that they are competent practitioners who have the knowledge, skills, judgment, and attitude needed to perform duties in a competent manner. And so the essential practice competencies with the Academy's scope of practice really act in tandem. They assist in ensuring that we know that our professional responsibilities are, and they assist in ensuring competencies in fulfilling these responsibilities. Besides the essential practice competencies and our Academy scope of practice documents, careful examination of other professional documents, such as our standards of practice guidelines, job descriptions, code of ethics, and social policy statements, all help to assist us in guiding our practice, helping establish control over our practice, and most importantly, influencing the overall quality. So again, looking at quality as being the important driver, being able to address the requirements of the regulatory agencies and HIPAA and Joint Commissions, all of this is really moving us forward to this particular new revised process. This competency model, I think, addresses and helps us understand the various continuum of practitioners, all of whom can benefit from this particular new process. Let me just briefly identify and explain what these various quadrants represent in terms of variety of practitioners. This model has actually been helped to describe all practitioners, again, across many professions, not just dietetic practitioners. It provides a framework supporting the transition to a practice competency-based system, such as what we will be moving towards. For example, there are consciously competent practitioners right now, and there are also unconsciously competent practitioners. That's quite a mouthful, but let me explain. The consciously competent practitioners are able to consciously and critically reflect on their practice in order to identify their own learning needs and to determine how to best take action in satisfying these needs. Whereas the unconsciously competent practitioners are those who have the correct knowledge, skill, and judgment, but they may not consciously be engaged in what they're doing, which is key to realizing the ways in which they can better become competent. Next, we have the possibility of being consciously incompetent practitioners, and those are the ones who know that they do not have the knowledge. Excuse me, it's very important to be on mute. Thank you. So as I was saying, the consciously incompetent practitioners are those who are consciously know that they do not have the knowledge, skill, or judgment. There is a code of ethics that practitioners must adhere to, and I'll mention that again, but for many of you who are already in your current cycle, you are aware that there is the requirement to have at least one continuing education with the code of ethics, and that will continue as we move into the new process as well. Finally, in this quadrant of various models of practitioners, the unconsciously incompetent practitioners are those who do not know what they don't know. And these are practitioners who really need to understand that they're not demonstrating competence. This process will help them tremendously in terms of being able to better identify where their own learning needs are. This is a little bit of a background that illustrates that this has been a journey that the profession has been on for a very long period of time, and it actually creates a timeline dating back to 1969, and it spans over 45 years, as you can see. And during this entire time, the profession has been working towards establishing a recertification system that would provide enhanced support to our competencies. The evolution of the essential practice competencies began, as noted here, in 1969, when we first had the mandatory 75 continuing education requirement. After this foundational moment in the dietetics profession, it was quite monumental actually as well. The system's evolution took place in 1974, followed by the creation of the Standards of Practice, the Revised Code of Ethics, and the Self-Assessment Series that was introduced in 1989. During the 1990s, the specialist credentials were introduced, and there was also increased focus on redesigning the recertification process. In 2001, the professional development process was implemented and once again reevaluated in 2006. Following this reevaluation, CDR continued its discussion of recertification system enhancements, resulting in what we have today in the development of the practice competencies. I might also say that rather than thinking that these competencies have been sort of pulled out of a hat somewhere, we're very proud to be able to validate and say that these have been validated by dietetic practitioners. And maybe many of you recall being part of that validation process, where we actually have scientifically described competencies that have been, in fact, validated by a very large number of our current DTRs and RDs. So what are these essential practice competencies that have been defined and validated? A competency, as noted here on this slide, is a set of defined behaviors that provide a structured guide enabling the identification, evaluation, and development of behaviors in an individual. So the essential practice competencies for CDR credentialed nutrition and dietetic practitioners, and note that there are specific competencies that are defined for the RD, RDN, and specific competencies, practice competencies that have been identified for the DTR and DTR. An important resource that explains these is that essential practice competency guide that I showed on a previous slide, and you can see on this slide that tiny little icon, but that is going to be available on the CDR websites. However, please note that the practice competencies process do not warrant or guarantee competencies, but rather what they demonstrate is a practitioner's commitment to providing high-quality dietetic and nutrition services. And so there is no absolute guarantee, but it certainly is a step in the right direction that we are committed to being the best that we can and providing the highest quality services that are possible. So the question comes, how can I expect my own personal needs to be addressed? Well, for one, we need to be assured that the competencies are very, very comprehensive and broad enough to include a wide variety of learning goals. And you will see as we move forward in this presentation the very wide breadth of various practice areas and knowledge and skills, attitudes, and behaviors that are encompassed by these particular essential practice competencies. As I mentioned already, they have been validated, and they have been validated by a very high number of practitioners. And in fact, there is an article that is being written that will soon be published in the journal that will describe the validation process, and you will be able to read and see how statistically significant this process was. And so it's very important to recognize that it is very descriptive of what the profession has indicated as important to both ourselves and the interest in protecting the public. A question that has always come up when there's been a change in the recertification process: does it mean that I have to take the exam over again? So rest assured that as we become recertified, the transition to competencies does not mean re-examination. So you should be able to breathe a big sigh of relief in that regard. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the framework of these competencies and what they really mean, because as you would use that resource that you find posted on the website, you're going to find that it's a fairly long document and that it has a lot of various chapters or components to it. So let me give you a little bit of overview as to how this framework actually was developed and how it's going to be able to be transitioned into the new PDP process. You will see on this slide that we have 4 levels illustrated, and think of it somewhat in terms of an outline. The highest level is the spheres, and the spheres are defining an area in which someone acts, exists, or has influence or significance. These are very broad spheres, they're very high-level wording, and they describe the major functions for effective performance. Then we have the competencies, and these are more specific. They begin to describe various identifiable knowledge, skill, judgment, and attitude. So the knowledge, skill, judgment, and attitude, and you'll notice that competencies are really more than just knowledge and skill. It really gets into description of critical thinking and certain, not just behaviors. Performance indicators, then, are yet more specific, and they describe a set of factors that define that. So how is it that we know we're actually meeting a competency by what we do in these particular performance indicators? And then to help you sort of see how this fits into a particular practice area or how it might relate to what you as a practitioner are doing, we have provided practice illustration examples. And again, when we developed these, we really took suggestions for the practitioners who were part of the validation study, because as you completed that validation process, you provided to our panel lots and lots of practice illustration examples as to how you saw this fitting into your practice. So again, you were actually able to help define this. For those of you who might be familiar with the standards of professional performance, hopefully you'll begin to see that there's a parallel and a similarity in terms of how these competency framework for the competencies have some similarity to how the standards of professional performance have been laid out for us. We have, in this broad spectrum of essential practice competencies, we've divided them into 2 types, and there are actually 14 different competencies, practice competencies. We've identified 9 of them as core essential and 5 of them as functional essential. So let me try to explain what the difference is between these 2 different types of competencies. The first 9 spheres represent the core essential practice competencies that describe, again, knowledge, skills, judgment, and attitudes that apply to all credentialed practitioners, regardless of your role, regardless of your area of practice, or regardless of your setting. And these core spheres include, and these are the spheres, so you can see that they're very broad, general statements: ethics and professionalism, communications, leadership and advocacy, critical thinking and decision-making, informatics, research, evidence-informed practice and quality improvement, safety and risk management, food, nutrition and dietetics and physical activity, and education and counseling. And these really represent knowledge, skill, judgment, and attitudes that apply across all practice settings. The functional essential practice competencies, on the other hand, you can see really speak more specifically to the functional settings where you are actually describing and where you will be practicing, such as clinical care, business, industry, and product development and marketing, community and population health, food service management, and organizational management. So you can see that between the core essential practice competencies and the functional essential practice competencies, we've really covered the broad spectrum of practice settings and functions that relate to our nutrition and dietetics practitioners. Now, keep in mind, too, that you might have roles and responsibilities and need knowledge, skills, behaviors, and attitudes in more than one functional competency and more than one core competency. This is an example. Thank you. Unmute. Very good. Thank you. Here on this particular slide, we have an example of how the spheres, competencies, performance indicators, and practice illustrations are laid out. And again, as you go to the resource book that's posted on the website, you'll see this detail listed for each one of the spheres and the competencies. So for instance, this would be in the sphere of clinical care. So the sphere that's not listed here would be the clinical care functional setting. And an example of a competency within that, so this would be number 10 sphere, and it would be 10.2 competency. Implement the nutrition care process to ensure individual health goals are established, monitored, and achieved while adhering to the standards of practice in the nutrition care for RDNs. An example of a performance indicator that you might choose that would be relevant to your practice in implementation of a nutrition care process could be 10.21 and 10.22. And you see there that that is speaking specifically to what you would do as part of your implementation of the nutrition care process. Then we've provided for you some examples of practice illustration. Now, this does not mean that they are all inclusive. There may be others that would be relevant to your practice, but this does give you sort of an example of what you might be doing in order to identify and select valid and reliable tools. So this is breaking down your steps into a little bit more specificity. And you will see that for each of the spheres, there are a number of competencies. For each competency, there are a number of performance indicators, and then subsequently, there are many practice illustration examples. So how are they going to aid us? So this is a lovely document. It may seem fairly academic at this particular point, but let me begin now to bring home to how this is actually going to be helping each of us in our recertification process. First of all, if you are returning to work or not practicing, they will aid you in terms of reflecting on and assessing learning needs in order to determine how to gain whatever knowledge, skill, judgment, and behaviors are essential in providing safe, ethical, and competent care. Keep in mind that the CDR's role in the recertification process is not only to help practitioners become competent, but also to be providing safety and provide safety to the public. These practitioners then will be able to identify learning needs that will help them, guide them in their continued professional development, and will assist them in their ongoing competency. As for those practitioners who might be creating job descriptions, these practitioners will find the competencies and the performance indicators very, very valuable, as will those who are in leadership positions who are overseeing individuals or creating job descriptions for your employees. I think you will find this to be very, very beneficial. It will also facilitate career change and advancement and help others become more aware of the roles and responsibilities of dietetic practitioners. And it will also, as I mentioned in the very early slide, it will demonstrate the value for third-party accreditation processes, such as HIPAA and Joint Commissions. The competencies are posted on the CDR website, and this is a very small slide, but it does illustrate to you. They will be incorporated in the development process, and you can view this document right away, and it's on the CDR website, .org/competencies. You may want to periodically check the website, because as this is a process that will be rolled out over a number of years, there will be updates and there will be changes to that, as well as access to what I'm going to be talking about very shortly, our Goal Wizard and our Dream Wizard. So stay tuned. That's probably one of the most exciting things coming forth in this new revised process. For those of us who are credentialed and have gone through recertification 5-year periods in the past, we have had a PDP guide. And this PDP guide is being revised, and it's going to reflect the changes. We currently have a 5-step process, and the new process now is going to entail a 3-step recertification process. I'll talk about that in a couple of subsequent slides. And then I've already mentioned that we have a Goal Wizard that's going to be very, very helpful. Practice Competency Profile is a new term that, again, will be very beneficial as we move forward. And by using the Goal Wizard that's going to be set up online, you will be able to create for yourself a practice competency profile. And this will be generated through an online process of answering a number of self-assessment questions. And I will be illustrating that to you very shortly. As we know, there currently is a 5-step process in our knowledge-based process, where we have a professional self-reflection. We've been able to identify our own learning needs as a result of that. We've created learning need codes. We've submitted our plan. We've acted and logged our activities, and then we have gone through the professional development evaluation. With the new Goal Wizard that you see there, with the little icon, with the wizard, with the great star moving us in a positive direction, we have now been able to take the first 3 steps of our 5-step process and put that all into a Goal Wizard process. So in that way, we've now collapsed this down to what we call a 3-step process. So you've got the Goal Wizard, which really encompasses the self-reflection, helps with the learning needs assessment, and the end product of that Goal Wizard will be able to create a learning plan, just like you did previously with the knowledge base, and then the activity log and the professional evaluation. The activity log will not change, and the professional development evaluation will not change. So the real changes are going to occur in what we had done individually on the 3 steps through the Goal Wizard. And here again, just in a little bit larger slide, you'll see the composition of the Goal Wizard in the revised PDP process. So this Goal Wizard that I mentioned, what's going to happen here? Well, we will be able to, with the Goal Wizard, identify our current employment status. And there will be options that will allow us, depending on what your current employment status is, to select an option that is appropriate to you, and then it will take you down an algorithm and a path for subsequent series of questions that will look at your current status, current and future needs, employment status. It'll look at possibly some changes that might be happening. And as a result of that, series of questions that you'll be able to select from a series of pull-down menus, you will be able to have a competency profile. This competency profile is going to be a very broad picture of a wide variety of competencies and performance indicators that might be relevant to your current or future plans. And from there, you will select the competencies that you wish to put into your learning plans. Note in parentheses on this slide that the competencies that you will select from your broad-based competency profile will actually replace what we currently know as our goals, our learning goals. From there, we will then be able to select and narrow down more specifically performance indicators that we want to work on to be able to demonstrate those competencies, or in other words, meet our goals. And these performance indicators will replace the learning need codes that we currently have within our PDP process. And then we will have our learning plan. Here again, now I'm going to, this is a little bit of the framework of those series of questions, that so you can understand sort of the back of the house of the computer goal wizard. So if you are practicing, you'll have a chance to select the practicing route. If you are not practicing, you will have that as an option. And for those who are newly credentialed and may not be yet gainfully employed, or just starting out in a new employment opportunity, you will also have a path. And you will see then that from this flow chart, you will be able to, if you are practicing, identify what your current role and responsibilities are. You'll also be asked some questions about, do you envision a change in your practice? And you will have an opportunity to select mandatory learning, either from the Code of Ethics, which will be mandatory from a professional perspective, or many of the mandatory learning that is currently within your employment setting you will find as pull-down options in the Goal Wizard. You will then be able to look at external requirements for mandatory learning, as I said, that are based upon your practice, institutional requirements, as well as the Code of Ethics. I might also note, and you will see this as we have some slides up specifically to the Goal Wizard as we move on, that practicing also encompasses volunteering. So we've specifically made an opportunity to look at places that you might be volunteering. So this is really helpful if you are retired and volunteering, or semi-retired and volunteering, so that this gives you an opportunity as well to have the CDR PDP portfolio process be relevant to you. You will see that for the newly credentialed, future direction, as well as the mandatory learning. So I think we've encompassed a lot of the various practice areas that you would find relevant to all of our practitioners. So moving now into the Goal Wizard. As I've mentioned, it will allow you to reflect on where you are in your career and where you would like to be in the future. And this has always been a critical first step, whether we've had our current process or we're now moving to our new PDP revised process with competencies. Helping you identify knowledge and skills that you need to develop or strengthen, to enhance competencies, remain competitive, or take advantage of new opportunities in the marketplace. And by going through the Goal Wizard, you will then have both the opportunity to engage in a very comprehensive professional self-reflection and come up with your learning plan. So here now, moving forward, are actual slides of what the Goal Wizard will look like. To access your Goal Wizard tool, you will log in to your My CDR page on CDR's website, just like you have always done. Clicking on My CDR, enter your username and password. And once you've been directed to that page, you will then next click on the blue PDP box. And again, for those of you who have recently been on the website, you'll see that this is very familiar and very consistent with how we now get into our current process. Once you've been directed to that, you'll click on the blue PDP box. And on the following page, you'll then click on the green Learning Plan button, just like we've done before. So this is a screenshot of the introduction talking about what's new, what does this mean. So a lot of what's in this presentation you will also be able to see reinforced on your web page. So now I'm going to take you through the screenshots for the Goal Wizard, and you'll be able to get a glimpse as to how this is actually going to work for you. You will see I test that your name will actually come up there, so it's personalized to you once you log in. And you will see on the right side a little click with FAQ. CDR has created an extensive list of frequently asked questions and their answers. And at any time, if you have a question as you're going through this and you want to see if your question might already be one that others have asked and an answer is provided to you, you can click on the frequently asked questions. And this just gives you an overview in terms of what you're going to get as a result of this. The practice competency profile is described here, as well as the learning plan. And so then you can click on Let's Get Started. You can always go back to the introduction, and you can always, on this screenshot, as you'll see, be able to access the frequently asked questions. So if you get stuck or if you are concerned about something at any point in time, you can always check to see if those questions might be there for you. And if not, you can always contact CDR and ask that question through the email contact. There's also, you can see the bar across the top in which you will note exactly where you are in this process. So you'll be able to sort of track your progress on the Goal Wizard. And it doesn't show so much on this slide, but it will on subsequent shots, where you can go back and you can sort of get out and return to it. So if it's not something that you can feel you can do in one sitting, you can come back and to be able to access it and pick up where you left off. So here you can see those options that I mentioned previously on the flow chart, where you are currently practicing and or I am volunteering. So that's one of the options. No, I'm not practicing, but I want to maintain my credential. That's very, very important. You don't want to lose your credential if you're not practicing, because you still are required to maintain competencies and to be able to proficiently re-enter at a point in time you wish to do so. Or I'm newly credentialed, and this would be for the newly credentialed and the person who has just received their DTR or RD status. So your first responsibility is to check which one of those boxes most relates to your situation. So here is an example, and if you are currently practicing, assuming you had checked that very first option, the Goal Wizard will ask you to select from a list of positions that apply to your previous or current position and employment setting. And if you're newly credentialed, the Goal Wizard will ask you to identify your role when you were an intern. So it builds upon some of the experiences that you've had, not necessarily in an employment setting, but in your internship, which is preparing you for those jobs. So there's, again, some carryover from the competencies that you had learned in your internship. It's important to note also that you don't have to select just one. You can select as many of these as you feel relate. And in this early process of the Goal Wizard, you don't necessarily need to be selective, because the answers that you provide in these early questions will generate your comprehensive profile. And once that profile has been developed, then you will be able to narrow that down to actually create your learning plan. So in these early questions, you really want to be as broad and as comprehensive as possible, because that will generate for you the widest opportunity to select the competencies that relate best to your learning plan. So then, again, these screenshots are pretty small, but as you get into it, you'll be able to see them more easily. But based upon your selections regarding your employment position and setting from the previous slide, you'll then next reflect on and assess the activities in your previous and current position. And here again, you want to select as many activities that you have that demonstrate your previous or current day-to-day professional activities. And these activities can be related to communication, education, and computer skills, leadership, management, team collaboration, advocacy, quality improvement, evidence-based practice, research, education, counseling, teaching, industry, sales, and marketing. So again, you see that it's very, very broad. Now, what is happening in the computer program as you're beginning to answer these questions, it's beginning to generate for you which competencies and which performance indicators are going to be related to your job setting and some of your day-to-day activities. So in the past, where we had to come up with those ourselves to create a learning plan, now the computer, based upon our answers, is beginning to generate for us this very broad professional profile. Next, and about 15% through the process, as you can see across the top slide, you'll be asked to reflect on and assess the skills, knowledge, and judgment that you've demonstrated or have been demonstrating in your practice. And again, here you want to select all that apply. Note that at any time you can go back to the previous slide if working on one slide, on one shot, generate some thinking that you may have missed something from a previous and you wanted to add it, then you can go back and you can add to that and then continue forward. The next set of questions talks about interests in future work. So here the Goal Wizard will prompt you to reflect upon and assess your interests and future work environment, so that you'll be able to identify any external factors or trends that are already affecting or that may affect your nutrition and dietetics role and area of practice. And again, if you think about it, these were some of the questions that we were asked to reflect on our own that was not submitted to CDR when we submitted our learning plan. So what we tried to do in this Gold Wizard process and in the first step, step 1, consolidating steps 1, 2, and 3, is to parallel that which we currently have, but to make it more specific and more broad-based and link it to the competencies then that are going to be part of our new process. The next, because this is a 5-year process of recertification, like in the previous process or our current process for many of us who are still on that, it's asking us to look for the next 5 years. Do we anticipate a change? Yes, no, or not sure. I mean, sometimes we're not able to look ahead on our crystal ball and know for sure any changes that might be coming down the pipe. So you can indicate, well, maybe, but not sure. And then now you can see that this is about a quarter of the way through the Goal Wizard. Now, assuming that you did answer yes to the question whether you anticipate a change, you would then be receiving this particular next step. In what role do you anticipate practicing? Now, if you answered no in the previous slide, then you would not be given this particular screen, and you would be moved directly to the next screen, which addresses the mandatory learning. Now, you will see that ethics is included in here, as well as for those of you who are working in institutions where you have mandatory learning, you will see some of the mandatory learning items listed here as well. Institutional Review Board, leadership, Lean Six Sigma, many of you have that, I know, in hospital settings, PASSA, elder abuse, life cycle. So we try to encompass those mandatory learnings that we know exist in many, many institutions. Here, now this takes us specifically to the required ethics learning goal. So these are the identifiable performance indicators that relate to the ethics. And keep in mind that you will need to select at least one of them in order for your plan to be complete, because all practitioners have to abide by our code of ethics. After reflecting on, assessing, and answering the questions, which takes you about halfway through the goal wizard, you will then be able to see this practice competency profile. And by clicking on Display My Profile, you will have a very comprehensive. Don't be afraid with what you see, because it's going to be fairly large, and it will include an extensive list of your competencies based upon the questions and answers that you provided the goal wizard up to this point, and also all of the performance indicators. Now, keep in mind that that does not necessarily represent your final learning plan. You will be able to, from this point onward, select those that are most relevant to your particular learning plan. You may, however, and you'll have the opportunity not only to display it, but to print it. And by printing it, you'll be able to have a very good, broad description of what your current role responsibilities are, what are some of the relevant competencies associated with that, even though not all of them may end up in your particular CDR PDP learning plan. This is going to be an example of your practice competency profile. And you will see that the first one here is you can add competencies not selected. So the selected ones that come on the bottom of the screenshot are the ones that are going to be generated based upon your answers. You can review them, and if you miss something and you now look at them and you think about something that you hadn't thought of when you were first going through the goal wizard, you have at the top of this particular screenshot the opportunity to add some that may not be in there. And you can scroll down them. Again, it's all of the others that weren't included that you could add to that. Now, you'll note here, I just want to point out something on this slide. The competencies are listed 1.4, 2.2, 3.1. The first number of each of those competencies represents the sphere. And if you note back on that slide where we had the core spheres and the functional spheres, each of them has a number. So the first number of the competencies refers to the sphere in which that competency is listed. The number then of the second number is the number of competencies. Keep in mind now that these competencies are going to replace your goals. So this would be an example of all of your goals. And you can see that that's way more goals than what you probably currently have in your learning plan or ultimately would want to choose. So this is the broad list from which you will then narrow it down further, prioritize in essence to develop your learning plan. It's important to reflect on and assess the competencies listed, because you'll be building your Step 1 learning plan based upon this profile. After you've decided which competencies are most relevant to your learning goals in the next 5 years, you can then delete any of these that you feel not relevant. Keep in mind, though, you see that Sphere 1 up there is required. It's in red. You have to have at least one of those. So you're not going to be able to delete that. And like I said, you can show the whole profile. You can go back again, and you can actually print it if you wish to have it before you start deleting any of them for narrowing down and prioritizing. You must select at least one competency and one performance indicator for this competency, and that's the ethics. And you must identify one from the ethics and professionalism, which is Sphere 1. And there are actually 6 from which you can choose. For each competency, e.g. goal, you have to have at least one performance indicator. Just like in the past, for every goal, you had to have at least one learning code, learning need code. Keep in mind that the competencies are now replacing goals, and the performance indicators are replacing your old learning need codes. So the requirement is very much the same in one goal, one learning need code, one competency, one performance indicator. Now, we're moving forward to the final version of your practice competency profile before creating your learning plan. And you see on the bottom here that you can print your profile, you can go back, you can also, at this point, save and return later, or you can move forward to the next step, which is actually creating your learning plan. So you have an option here. You can sort of sit on it and reflect a little bit. You can print it out and have a hard copy. Excuse me. There, now I'm back again. I must admit, when I was going through this, just as a trial run, I found it very helpful to print off the large hard copy of that, because then I had a chance before I actually went in and did sort of the dry run for what would be my learning plan. I could sort of reflect on it and see the big picture. And then I had it also for future reference, knowing that I might want to come back and make some changes in the future, or just have the comprehensive list available for me without having necessarily to go into the website all the time. So here, if you're going to create your learning plan, you can save and exit. I'll come back later to review it. So again, it gives you the option. Keep in mind that if you want to go back to the introduction, you can. And if you have questions, you can, again, access the frequently asked questions. Now, this is where you're getting into the final part of creating your actual learning plan. And you'll see that you're about 2/3 of the way done. So we're nearing the home stretch at this point. All of the competencies that were part of your profile, now you have the choice to either add them to your learning plan or sort of keep them and as part of your profile, but not necessarily move them forward to your particular plan. So you can select any one, and as you would click on the arrow, the green arrow there, it's going to move that into your learning plan goals. And you see that it's already giving you the sense that that's going to be your goal. As you will narrow down, so in this particular example, from the competencies from the previous slide, we've selected 4. So in essence, there's going to be 4 goals moving forward in the learning plan. And from each of the goals now, if you go over to select a performance indicator, all of the performance indicators that are relevant to that particular competency or goal are going to come up on your screenshot. And what you will then do is you will select one or more, because you have to have one at least, and then they will become the substitute for your current learning need codes. So what you have here is an example of the performance indicators. So you will have selected on the previous screen, you're going to see what the performance indicators are, and then you will have the opportunity in this screenshot to actually click them or not click them. And in this case, because we have the illustration of the Code of Ethics, you would have to select at least one. And that's true of all of the others as well. So for each of your goals now that you will have selected, you'll get another screenshot that will allow you to select the performance indicator. What I really like on this particular part of the Goal Wizard is that if you click over to the far right relevant CPE activities, based upon the database that CDR has, you will be able to see what some of the activities are that are currently available for continuing education that are going to relate specifically to your competency, or excuse me, your competency and performance indicator. Much like we had now activities that related to our learning codes. Excuse me, I had a lapse for a minute. See, it's already becoming old hat, and I'm already beginning to think about our new process, which is good. So from here, you would, again, have the other goals and be able to select your performance indicators. What you have, then, you'll have a goal in number. You'll have the competencies, which are noted in this particular instance. Everyone's going to always have one from Sphere 1, but Sphere 9 and Sphere 10 have generated the other 3 competencies or other goals. And then you can print your learning plan. You can return to update it, or you submit later, or you can actually submit it. And you just submit it online. And the nice step about this is that you will not have to wait at all, because the final step of the Goal Wizard process, you will submit your button, and your learning plan will automatically be approved upon submission. CDR will continue to confirm completion of your learning plan, but CDR will no longer manually approve your learning plans. What this means is as soon as you submit your Step 1 learning plan, you can immediately begin to log CPUs into your Step 2 activity log. So there's no more waiting time. And at any time, you can also view, print, or revise your learning plan, or you may want to, as I mentioned earlier, print your complete practice competency profile. So you have generated, as a result of your thoughtful answers to the questions in the Goal Wizard, pretty much everything that you can do, should do, and want to do in terms of becoming competent in a quality provider of nutrition and dietetic services. Now, that takes us through the Goal Wizard, which is really Step 1. And you can see that we've collapsed in that Step 1 process many of the functions that previously you did on your own, but that you didn't submit to CDR. They were there for your own self-reflection. The activity log, formerly Step 4, and Step 3, now formerly Step 5, the evaluation requirements are going to remain unchanged. The activities are going to be the same. So if you look in the revised PDP guide that's going to be available, you will still see the listing of all of the professional education guidelines and activity types, such as 170 is our lecture and seminar. Many of you are very familiar with that. 150 is interactive workshop, 720 printed, or 740 web-based self-study activities. And if you have any questions about the CDR-approved professional activities and guidelines, you can refer to the guide, or you can always contact CDR as well. Keep in mind that many of the activity types do have guidelines in terms of the number of hours, maximum number of hours that can be recorded within a 5-year cycle, or the specific types. Keep in mind that some of them also need prior approval before actually logging them. And so referencing that guide to make sure that your activity types are within compliance so that you maximize the number of CPUs that you have and want to use to complete your learning plan is very, very important. In terms of the Step 2 activity log, that's sort of a review. It's designed to document, and you will be able to document it online in much the same way that we're currently doing with our plan. And then the Step 3 allows us to actually reevaluate and to think about how we've been able to meet our goals and the outcome is actually a completed evaluation of the effectiveness. And that's very similar to what we have. Keep in mind that the process, as stated earlier, in and of itself does not guarantee competency. It allows us to demonstrate that we are committed to being competent, and a serious self-reflection and evaluation is going to be very important in terms of the assurance of competency. The number of CPUs that you will be required to log is going to remain the same. So RDNs and RDs will continue to need 75 for every 5-year recertification cycle. And NDTRs and DTRs will need 50, much the same as they've had before. And there's no changes in the types or the actual amount that are required. You will actually evaluate in much the same way that we've done before. And like I said, this is a way to demonstrate that we are committed to ongoing competence and self-improvement. Now, because this process has changed, CDR has been working diligently to revise all of its materials. And I'm very pleased to say that there will be resources available. There's toolkits that we've created for educators, for practitioners, and for accredited providers. So the educator toolkit is pretty much completed, and it's going to be available on the CDR website. If some of you are leaders within your affiliates or DPGs or MIGs, and you are an accredited provider, there will be an accredited provider toolkit on the portal for accredited providers. And in that particular toolkit, all of our current learning codes will be crosswalked and referenced with the competencies. So as you have created programs that might have particular learning codes, you will be able to see how they then link into the performance indicators that will now be in individual practitioners' learning plan. And the practitioner resources will be available on CDR website. And that's the PDP guide, as well as some of the other resources that are available there. The educator one, if I want to go back here a minute, with the educator toolkit, trying to be responsive to how educators are dealing with their students, part of that will also include a YouTube video and a lesson plan for educators so that you'll be able to take this right ready into your classroom or your virtual classroom for helping your students be able to be ready to take this and hit the ground running. There's also some recorded presentations in the educator toolkit. So we're hoping to be responsive to how our students are learning, and YouTube videos are one of the things. And I was just informed that the YouTube taping happened last week, and I haven't seen the draft of it yet, but it was reported to us at our CDR meeting that it really went well. Everyone came well prepared with their scripts, and they had a very successful taping. So I'm anxious to see the YouTube video that was generated as a result of this. Here are some examples of some of the frequently asked questions that we've received already, and it'll just give you sort of a taste as to the comprehensiveness of the kinds of questions that you would find on that FAQ link on the Goal Wizard that was on every screenshot, as you saw. So one of the questions is, can my work competencies be incorporated in my PDP? And your PDP is your private property and should be focused on learning relevant to nutrition and dietetics, but there certainly are competencies that can be relevant to your work setting. And as you revise your job descriptions, as you might be going for a promotion or a job change, we certainly encourage you to think about how these competencies, which are actually learning goals, might be descriptive of tasks and activities that you do in your job or that you would like to have included in your job description. So it does have a lot of relevancy, I think, and also keep in mind that we incorporated questions regarding the mandatory learning that is frequently a part of many job descriptions. Another frequently asked questions, how does the goal wizard identify which performance indicators are relevant? Well, as I mentioned, once you have selected a competency, all of the performance indicators that relate in any way to that competency are generated. And so the goal wizard will list all of them, and then what you need to do is to select the ones that you think are most relevant to your competency goal that you're going to put in your learning plan. And the profile will actually include all of them. So now I suspect, and I'm seeing some of the questions that are being generated already, and a lot of questions are evolving around when is this going to take place, how is it affecting me, and what's the timeline. So let me tell you now how this is all going to happen. New registrants actually are going to begin using the goal wizard and the new competency-based portfolio process starting this June 2nd, 2015. That's why the Educator Toolkit is so important, because those of you who are educators are going to need to have that information available for your graduates of your internships and practice settings, so that any newly credentialed DTR or RD who is going to begin their new cycle will begin straight out of the box with this process after June 2nd. Current registrants, so those of us who are up for recertification, those of you who would begin your new cycle, not this June, but next June, June 1, 2016, you will begin using it then. So if your 5-year period is ending come May 31st, 2016, and you'll start a new 5-year cycle in 2016, you will then be using it. So what that means is a new registrant may have up to 6 years to complete the first cycle of certification or registration. So the first group of newly credentialed will have anywhere after June 2nd, 2015, and then their 5-year group would expire. That first 5-year would end on May 31st, 2021. But the second group, which is going to be credentialed recertification, or recredential, I should say, will begin on June 1st, 2016. And then thereafter, every year, a new group is going to come in. So it's going to take a 5-year period to be able to, a 5-year cycle to get everybody in, which is the same process of rollout that we did with our most recent PDP process. So you can take a look at when your 5-year cycle dates are relevant and know when this is going to be available to you. However, those of you who have to wait the longest before it's going to be applicable do have available a Dream Wizard. And the Dream Wizard is a demo version of the Goal Wizard, and that's going to be available for all practitioners regardless of when your 5-year cycle is going to actually require the use of competencies for your learning plan. And it will take you up and through the process of actually submitting your learning plan. So the use of the Dream Wizard takes you through all of the shots that I showed you that are currently on the Goal Wizard, with the exception of actually submitting it, because you won't be submitting it because you're not coming up for your time. But you can certainly use it to generate competencies. You can look at it to do the self-reflection. And what I found by being able to do that, because my 5-year cycle actually started this last June, was that I was able to, because we had the Dream Wizard sort of available as a demo as we were finalizing it, I was able to go through and do the self-reflection, and from the competencies that were generated, I was able to use those as I added my own goals for my particular plan. So even though you might not be required to begin this process immediately, you will have access to all of the self-reflection and the list of competencies and the generation of those relating to your practice area through the Dream Wizard. So I think we have now the opportunity for some questions. And I don't want to send you off, even though the slide says thank you for attending. This now is going to move us into questions. And I see that there are a lot of questions that have been generated. So let's see. How do we want to move forward here? I can see some of the questions that have been.
Hi, Karen. You just need to scroll up to see the remaining.
Scroll up?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was scrolling down here. Okay. Please mute. Right. Okay. I'm looking down on the chat. Is that where they are? Oh, first question. Okay. Will there? Okay. I'm into the questions here. This is good. I'm also seeing a lot of this is great. People are liking it, so I appreciate those comments as well. My question is, how might we protect patients from other professionals attempting to act like a dietitian and provide nutrition therapy in the quadrant of unconsciously incompetent? For an example, RN health coaches providing weight management or diabetes training to patients in a medically home model clinic setting. Well, I don't know that we can ever totally prevent them from acting in ways that may not be as competent as we would desire. However, what we can do by the use of the Dream Wizard or the Goal Wizard, if you're actually coming up for the actual recertification, is to demonstrate to our team members and the health professionals that we work with that these are indeed our competencies and that we have the knowledge, skills, attitude, and behaviors that demonstrate that. I also like the example that you have provided here in your question regarding weight management. Just so that you know, coming down in the future, CDR is in the process of developing a multi-specialty weight management certification credential, so that is going to allow individuals who might be interested in providing weight management to become credentialed through CDR to demonstrate competencies, much like we have the CDE for the diabetes education. So I think that the use of the competencies, getting back to my answer to this question, will be able to demonstrate how we are really competent. And contrary to the knowledge-based process that we have right now, we are going to be able to articulate much more clearly what it is we do, not just necessarily what we know. So hopefully that's going to help us moving forward. Another question was, does anyone know when this change is going into effect? So hopefully I've answered that in the ending slides on this. Yes, it will be rolled out as we finish our current 5-year portfolio. So someone was astute enough to understand that already. And the newly credentialed will begin this June. So educators, it's on on you to help them understand this process. So that's why the educator toolkit that's going to be up and available will be very, very important. Will this site be used by employers to seek dietitians for hire? I'm not quite so sure what exactly that means. This site is only available to credentialed practitioners. So as I said earlier, your profile is your private, you own that. And you have the opportunity to share that with your employers, but it is not going to be mandatory that you do. And they will not necessarily be able to get in to be able to see that, because you can only log on and access that information with your current login information. There's a question here, will there be a practice tool for dietetic interns? Well, the Dream Wizard that will be available to practitioners, even though you're not necessarily going to be able to access the Goal Wizard, which is the real live one where you get to submit your learning plan, that Dream Wizard is going to be available for students as well. So as an educator and you are working with your students to help them understand it, you'll be able to go through the Dream Wizard and they'll be able to actually do a mock-up prior to their being newly credentialed, at which point then they will actually get on and be able to complete the Goal Wizard. And yes, someone had asked a question about that, and CDR is completing a student learning module. And keep in mind also that this webinar is being recorded, and it's going to be available online. It will not be available for continuing education. That is only available to those of you who are currently live on the webinar, but it's going to be up and recorded. So this could also be used as a learning and teaching tool. Oh, here's a question. What does it mean by volunteering? Practicing and volunteering. I'll use my own situation as an example, if I may. I am currently retired from my full-time educator role as a DI and DPD director, but I am serving on CDR, so I am volunteering in terms of my professional leadership, and there were a number of questions that were relevant to being a leader within the profession. I also do volunteering at our food pantry, and I do volunteering at our free clinic in which I'm providing nutrition, counseling, and services to many of the clients and patients who are seen by nurse practitioners and physicians at our free clinic. So I was able to, when I went through the Dream Wizard, I was able to answer questions with volunteering. And by putting in the clinic and the food pantry, I was getting competencies and performance indicators very similar to what I would have received had I said I was working full-time or working in a hospital. So I still need to be competent in my volunteering, both as a professional leader as well as a volunteer dietetic and nutrition practitioner out in the community. So hopefully that helps answer the question. So I'm volunteering in that way, and I'm also practicing, but I'm not getting paid for it. So I think that was an example of a couple situations that might be used to explain volunteering. How will previously earned CPEs be able to fit into the new Goal Wizard? Well, your previously earned CPEs are going to be relevant to your particular 5-year cycle. So the Goal Wizard won't be applicable for you until you fall into one of those 5-year cycle plans where you would be coming up for recertification. At that point, the CPE types and activities are still going to remain the same. Instead of being linked to learning codes that we currently have, they will now be linked and relevant to our performance indicators, which, as you should appreciate at this point, are going to replace those learning need codes. So as you have a learning need code, or excuse me, as you have a performance indicator in your new plan, you will have activities that are going to relate specifically to that performance indicator. You will log those activities in the same way that you're currently logging them, but instead of mapping them to a learning need code, you will be mapping them to a performance indicator. And so you can't pull over any from a previous plan into a new plan. You always start your new CPEs moving forward with your new plan. So hopefully that's answered your question, so that the activity types are going to remain the same. The way in which you log them are going to be the same. The only difference is you won't be logging them as relevant to a learning need code, but rather a performance indicator. Another question here. Yes, there were a number of questions about the newly credentialed, so hopefully I've answered that process. Here was a question, and just to verify the assumption, someone asked, I'm assuming since my new research cycle begins in June of 2015, I won't roll over until June 2020. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. Only a newly credentialed practitioner who gets credentialed between June 2015 and June 2016 will begin this process right away. Here's someone saying, I'm taking the RD exam next Saturday, so I thought it would be good to understand this new process. You're absolutely right. So you may, if you pass, still be on the current plan, but if you check on the website as soon as the Dream Wizard is up, you would be able to use the Dream Wizard to generate a list of competencies from which then you would have to manually write those competencies that you select for your goals into your learning plan, and then select learning codes as we currently have them. Dietetic interns be able to access the wizard. You'll be able to access the Dream Wizard, but not the Goal Wizard. The Goal Wizard is only going to be available as you come up for your new plan. Here's a good one. Will the Goal Wizard be available if I was credentialed in 2014 but haven't filled out a learning plan? You will not be able to use the Goal Wizard, but you will be able to use the Dream Wizard. And as I was answering the previous question, you'll be able to see a list of competencies from which then you can modify, or you can write them in just as they would come through the Dream Wizard, and they become your new goals. But then you will have to select appropriate learning need codes that reflect those competencies or performance indicators. So you can use the tool, but you won't be able to actually take advantage of the Goal Wizard to generate your learning plan. You'll have to wait another 5 years, but you'll be right ready because you will have used the Dream Wizard and you'll understand the process from the get-go. Right now, someone logged onto CDR and didn't see this new Goal Wizard. I'm not so sure that the Dream Wizard, you won't see the Goal Wizard, but you would see the Dream Wizard. And I think we just had our CDR meeting this last week, and I believe it's coming like about the middle of this month. So keep checking. Like they say, keep checking and it'll be there soon. But once it was just in the final stages because we did a run through the last couple of weeks. So I think with the new website that just got rolled out, a lot of the uploads that were going to be new and relevant to CDR we were waiting until the new website got some of its bugs out, and then that'll come. So, yep, this month for sure. Let's see. I didn't see the goal wizard. Okay, I answered that. I'll answer that. When is the PDP going into effect? Here's a person. My portfolio started from June 1st. I completed more than 75 credits in 5 months. Okay, so this particular person, you're sort of home free now for the next 5 years, and you've met your 75 credits. You've got your confirmation of that. I think our goal our intent at CDR would be that you continue to learn and to remain competent, but know that when you come up, let's see, if you started in June, so the next time you come around in 5 years, you'll be able to begin your new process using this. Okay. If you're planning to change areas of practice, would you select the potential employment setting in step 1 so that those related competencies are identified? Yes, most definitely, because you can do what you've done, what you're doing, or what you know for sure you're intending to do. So that does give you the opportunity. And as you move forward, you saw on those slide screenshots that you can always go back. You can also now with this, you can modify your plan at any time. So you don't have to submit a new plan. You could, at a point in time that you get a new job within that 5-year period, and you might not have anticipated it fully, and you may see that there are some competencies that are now relevant to your learning plan, you can go back and you can modify that and you can update it. So I think that will be an enhancement as well. But if you know up front that that's going to be something that will be relevant to your learning plan, by all means, select it, because it is yours, and you can select all and any that you feel are relevant to your potential and current learning. Here's a question. If you're in the midst of a research cycle, does this apply now or only for the next cycle? It's only going to apply for the next cycle. And we can't change our cycle other than if you haven't submitted a learning plan yet. Once the Dream Wizard is up, and I think I mentioned this, if you want to utilize the self-assessment process and the generation of a competency profile to give you suggestions for how you're going to write your own goals, by all means, do that. Like I said, I was able to do that being on CDR and being part of the panel that developed this process. We had test runs throughout, and I was able to do that, and I found it very, very helpful. Let's see. I'm getting a lot of comments, and this is a very positive thing. People are wishing that they could jump right in and start it right now. And believe me, we actually addressed that question. We anticipated that question in the formulation. And it would unfortunately provide great havoc to the computer system and the record keeping that we currently have with the recertification cycles. And that was one of the reasons that the Dream Wizard was designed to help people learn the process in advance and to give you some of the benefit of the tools and enhancement that the new process has, and to also allow us all to begin thinking not just in terms of knowledge, but to begin to think of our role and practice and profession in terms of competencies. So the more all of us can become familiar with competencies, the better we're going to be. Here's a question. If you have your CDE, can I still use this for my CEUs? Most definitely, because as I mentioned before, the learning activities and types are going to remain the same. So the CDE, for instance, is eligible for a complete recertification. That will still remain the same. So as the PDP guide is posted on the website, make sure that you look at that to verify that the kinds of CPUs or CEUs that you've used in the past are still going to be applicable. But yes, the answer specifically about CDEs, most definitely. I think we've generated or responded to all the questions. Are there any other questions that people have? Any last questions here?
Karen, did you see the question, what role is a dietetic internship director, or educator, or both?
Oh, I see. Oh, I misunderstood that question. I apologize. I thought that I had answered it in terms of your role to inform and educate your students, but I see the question now. Yes. If you go back, and I'm going to see if I can go back to the slide way at the beginning here. Let me see which slide it is. I might have, nope, let's see. Nope, I was back. I'll go up here a minute. I can answer that question. Oh, no, let me check in my slide set here so I'm not bouncing all over every which way. I want to get to the slide that lists the spheres, and that way I can answer that question specifically. Because, oh, here we go. Slide 13. Let me get to that one. Here, this slide. And actually, when I was doing some testing of this, being a former DI and DPD director and educator, I had the same thoughts, because you see that in functional, there is no educator listed specifically in higher education. And so one might wonder, well, ethics and professionalism, you have to. As I thought about the kinds of tasks that as an educator I was involved in, definitely communications, definitely critical thinking. I needed to have some knowledge about informatics and some skills there. Research, definitely in higher education. Education and counseling, and food, nutrition, and dietetics and physical activity. Now, I'm not necessarily working in clinical care or business, but as a director or as an educator, I would definitely feel that the organizational management would be relevant. So those would be the spheres that I might check and consider as relevant to an educator. So you really have a wide variety. You have to think a little bit out of the box, because with the functional essential practice competencies, your setting may not necessarily be listed specifically. And what we tried to do with those functional ones is we looked at trying to make them, again, broad. So community and population health, that really encompasses, and if going back to my example where I was volunteering at a food pantry, I actually checked that as one of my functional practice competencies. So again, you have to sort of stretch your thinking a little bit and come out of sort of our silos of work settings, because keep in mind that these spheres are very broad, and when you look at some of the competencies that are associated with them, that might also help you in broadening your thinking as to, oh, I really do that, even though, higher education is not specifically listed as a functional competency. So I hope that answers your question. Oh, oh, good. I'm getting some more questions. This is great. Here's someone who said they sent some questions and they did not get answered. So I hope that you are sending them again. And I see some new ones in here, so let me go down and hopefully I will address that particular question. Here's one. I understand that an ethics learning need is required. Do we also need to have one for each of the essential practice competencies? Okay, let me clarify that, if I may. You're absolutely right that an ethics need is required. And ethics, I'm glad I have this framework slide up here. Ethics is sphere 1. And in sphere 1, you have, I believe, 6 competencies. You will need to choose one of those competencies, and then you will need to choose one practice indicator from that competency for your core ethics. And so the essential practice competencies are substituting for the learning need codes. You can have more than one practice competency for a particular, or essential, excuse me. You have to have, let me make sure that this, here's where the new terms, I want to make sure I'm answering this accurately. Learning need ethics is required. So you need to select a competency from sphere 1, and you need to have a practice indicator from that competency. For every competency that you select within a given sphere, you have to have at least one practice indicator. And that practice indicator is the substituting the learning need goal. You do not need to have a competency or a goal from every one of these spheres. So you do not need to have 14 different goals. You could select, you could theoretically just have your ethics, because you're required to have at least one competency and one practice indicator. So you need at least one, but you don't need one from all of them. So hopefully I haven't made that answer more confusing than the question. So that since so many approaching retirement would like more information about this if you want to maintain your RD status. Oh, that's where you can put that you are not practicing, or you can select what I did with the volunteering, and you can still remain competent. And if you're not sure, all that is absolutely required of you is the one sphere, ethics and professionalism, and you have to have one competency, e.g. goal, and one performance indicator, I should say, as your associated with your ethics. And, you know, think about where you might like to still be involved professionally. And there's a lot of opportunity for selecting competencies that speak to leadership. There's also some competencies that speak to advocacy. And you might find that as you're retired, you're still politically active, you're still advocating, you're still, you know, contacting your Congress representatives and advocating for public policy. And there are certainly some competencies that address that. So I think once you begin to get into the list of competencies, and you may first want to go to the document that will be posted on the website, and you read that document, you'll be able to see that there are a number of them that would be relevant to a person in retirement. Here's a question about, will everyone also be involved with informatics? That is a sphere, but it's not necessarily a required sphere. Now, chances are pretty good that if you look at the competencies in that particular sphere, you're going to find something that is relevant to you. There's, I believe there's some competencies regarding use of social media. It's more than just electronic medical records. And so I think as we become more familiar with the competencies, there will be many, many practitioners who will find that having a goal or a competency around informatics will be very, very relevant. How can the continuing education providers find information about the information? This is the provider toolkit is going to be listed on the website. So on the provider portal. So if you are a continuing education provider, you'll be able to access that toolkit on your portal. And I think there was a question here about when it's going to be available. I believe it's going to be, this webinar should be available in about a week, and it'll be up. If you offer a CPE activity approved by CDR, will we have access to the educator toolkit that is available to approved CPE providers? Excuse me, I'm back. So the webinar is going to be available in about a week on the CDR website, and keep checking back because the new Eat Right website is just up and running. If you offer an activity approved by CDR, will you have access to the educator toolkit? The educator toolkit, I believe, is going to be on the Ascend website. And if I'm mistaken on that, we can send out a FAQ about that. But again, with the new website, I think the best thing is to check for all places, the CDR website, the Ascend website, and if you're an accredited provider, you'll probably want to check on that portal. There's a question. Currently, the CDR allows a person to revise their learning plan one time per 5-year cycle. In the new process, how often can the plan be revised? I believe, and again, that may be one of the frequently asked questions, and I must apologize, I didn't print off that document to have it completely in front of me. But I'm pretty sure that in this new process now, you can go in and update it as often as you want, because, as I mentioned, once you submit your plan or revise it, you will have the opportunity it's approved immediately. So that should be able to be revised, and especially if your plans change, if you get a new job, etc. I think I answered this question, but I'll reinforce it again. We get CPUs for this webinar, but once it's up on the website and it's for listening, it's just for information only. Oh, here's a good question. Do we need to have the one ethics CPE in our old or our current PDP plan? And the answer to that is yes. I came up for recertification this past June, as I said, and I had to have my one credit for ethics in that. So that's an unequivocally yes to everyone. With the new program, have to be done a CPU for each competency. Oh, just like in our current plan, you don't have to necessarily have met every goal with a learning plan. You have to complete 75 hours, and those 75 hours have to be linked legitimately to a learning code that you have in your plan. So moving forward, if you have selected a competency and a performance indicator, and you somehow in the 5 years will have met your 75 continuing education hours, without necessarily having something specific to one of them, you are not penalized because you will have met your requirements by completing your 75 hours of appropriate activities as they relate to the competencies and performance indicators that are in your plan. Now, where that will be beneficial as you reflect and evaluate what you've done or haven't done, as currently that information, that self-assessment reflection helps us in moving forward to a new plan. So it could be that within that 5-year time, you put it in at the beginning, it was no longer relevant, and you just didn't find that it was that important, and you didn't necessarily have any activities related to it, but you got 75 hours for the remainder. You will have still met your recertification requirements, recredentialing requirements. And you wouldn't necessarily have to go in and delete it. On the same token, you can add things and you can delete things. So hopefully that's answered the question. You're not going to be bound to making sure that you have a CPU for each competency, just in the same way we're not penalized right now if we don't have something. With the performance indicators replacing learning goals, this is a good one. Will we still be able to have general goals, competencies in which we can place CPEs that fall under that competency? For example, MNT-related performance indicators under an umbrella MNT competencies. Yes, you will be able to find the way that the performance indicators have been written, as well as the competencies are written, they are very general. So as you would get in and look at your performance indicators that are related to that, some are very specific and some are more general, much like our 5,000s right now are general, and the 50, 20 becomes more specific. So I think you will be able to be assured that you can still be quite general in moving forward, as we've done in the past. Oh, here's a question. How do we find continuing education for ethics? As we went through those screenshots, and it came to the selection on the goal wizard for selecting performance indicators, there was also an opportunity on the far right to select appropriate continuing education hours. So as you get into that goal wizard, you'll be able to see where some of those particular activities are listed. And keep checking back on the website because the CDR has a database of continuing education. And again, when you look at the competencies for ethics, you may be able to find a webinar. There may be some journal articles that relate to ethics. It may be some of the mandatory requirements within your facility have to do with ethics. HIPAA may be a requirement for your institution, but if you look at our Code of Ethics, there's also Code of Ethics that speak to confidentiality and patient confidentiality. So that some of the institutional requirements might also be very relevant in meeting continuing education for our professional Code of Ethics. Let's see. Oh, this is fantastic questions, guys. During selecting competencies, this is a good question, is it mandatory to select from both core and functional practice competencies? It's not mandatory, but I can probably tell you that you will likely do that just by virtue of the questions that you will have answered in those early processes on steps in the Dream Wizard, or the Goal Wizard. Because once you begin to put in what your job is, what your tasks are, what you have done in the past, what you think you want to do in the future, it's going to generate competencies from a variety of these core and functional spheres. So for instance, if I were to answer a question saying I'm taking care of patients with multiple diseases, I would be generating, or the system would generate for me, competencies coming from clinical care. It might also generate competencies coming from Sphere 8, where I've got food, nutrition, and dietetics and physical activity. That's where the nutrition care process might come in. And knowledge about various diseases would probably come in there. It would also generate some competencies from communications and likely maybe even education and counseling. And if I said I was working in an acute care setting, chances are pretty good that it would begin to generate some competencies from informatics. So you really don't need to worry about selecting the spheres up front. You're going to have competencies be generated from those spheres for you based upon your early answering of your questions. So that takes the sort of early groundwork out of this process, because you are going to be generating a lot of multi-discipline competencies and competencies that are going to come from a variety of ones. Ethics required for new cycle, not old cycles, right? Yes, I think I've answered that. Oh, and here someone was able to answer this as well. I believe there's a free one-credit ethics webinar on eatright.org. So there you go. There's your answer to your ethics. Will learning activities have both learning need codes and performance indicator codes for the 5-year period overlap so that everyone knows how to log their activities? Hopefully, yes. And this is why we've crosswalked both the learning need codes and the performance indicators for the accredited providers. I can tell you that one of our face-to-face meetings on the competency panel that worked on developing this entire process, we spent a whole day looking at crosswalks. And we took every competency, every performance indicator, and we tried to do the best of possible crosswalk with all of the learning need codes. So it's a pretty extensive crosswalk, and that should help providers be able to generate information for both types. Here's another question about the timing. When does the new system go into effect? For those of us starting over June 15th, you're going to have to wait a whole another 5 years. But you can use the Dream Wizard to help generate your goals. Where would functional medicine aspect be fitted in? Those competencies would be generated from food, nutrition, dietetics, and physical activity. So there are some of those in that. And what is the essential time commitment to complete the Goal Wizard? I did it in about 20 minutes. Now, 15, 20 minutes, but keep in mind that I was somewhat familiar with the process, having worked on the development of it. But the nice thing is that you can go in and out, and it will tell you across the bar top where you are in the process. So if you don't have time to complete it all at once, you can come in and out of that. Question about how will we submit for 2 hours of continuing education, and will there be a certificate? In the past, those of us who have been on webinars generally get an information to a link for a certificate through our email. Oh, the research dates on it. Yes, let me get those dates. Whoop, I think I can't go back. Can the dates be put back up? I think we are out of time. And again, I want to thank all of you, 1,000 plus, who have taken time out of your day today to begin to learn about our new and exciting process. And I hope that I've answered as many questions as possible and have squelched some concerns that you might have, and generated some positive interest in what we believe is a very, very exciting new process. So again, thank you and have a great day.